Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in for a journey, one that starts with a glass of wine in a darkened bar, takes us across the psychic landscape of post-war Seoul, and goes straight into the mind of one of Korea's most important modernist poets.
That's right.
Our mission today is to dive deep into Park In-hwan's The Wooden Horse and the Lady, or Mokma Sooknyeo.
And that title, it sounds almost simple, doesn't it? Maybe even a little romantic, like a memory.
Yeah, exactly.
But the academic analysis you shared, it pulls back the curtain on a far more complex reality. I mean, this poem is a container. It's a container for this profound post-war despair, and it uses some incredibly sophisticated literary symbolism to do it.
It is anything but a simple reflection.
It's a reckoning, a total reckoning.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack this a little. The poem, it immediately sets a scene. You have a speaker, a friend, they're drinking. But the conversation, it just escalates so quickly. It goes from the mundane act of having a drink to confronting, the biggest questions: life, literature, death itself. And our core goal for this deep dive is to really understand that alchemy. How did a Korean poet in the 1950s, standing literally in the rubble of war, use these global literary figures like Virginia Woolf and these common, almost childlike objects, a wooden horse, a glass of wine, to capture that crushing feeling of humo?
That existential emptiness.
That profound existential emptiness of an area that had, quite literally lost everything, from its buildings to its entire belief system.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this poem it's an absolute landmark of Korean modernism. It's a powerful distillation of the 1950s urban sensibility.
Right.
And that period, it was characterized by this heartbreaking fusion. You have the unique local trauma of the Korean War, and it's blending with these broader imported modernist ideas of alienation and loss that were sweeping the globe after 2 world wars.
He's taking something deeply personal and giving it a universal language.
Precisely. Park In-hwan manages to take that personal tragedy and frame it in this universal yet profoundly specific aesthetic language. It's really quite brilliant.
And our sources for today give us the entire text of the poem, which is great, but they also couple it with a deep academic analysis. It covers the structure, its 6 key symbols, and 3 really crucial layers of interpretation.
So it's like a shortcut, really.
It is. It's a shortcut to understanding why this poem resonated so much back then and why, frankly, it continues to resonate now. It speaks to a feeling of historical and personal collapse that we can still recognize today.
So where do we start? The setting.
Let's start right there, in that bar with that glass of wine.
Okay, so let's establish the scene because it acts as the entire frame for the poem's philosophy. The poem opens with the speaker explicitly stating he is having a glass of wine. Han janoi sulu masigo.
So the act of drinking is front and center.
Right. And drinking, especially late at night in a bar, it immediately signals that this is a moment of confrontation. It's fueled by a desire to evade reality, but also a search for some kind of temporary solace.
And what they choose to talk about it's just stunningly disparate. The conversation revolves around 2 subjects that feel like they should never, ever be in the same sentence.
They really shouldn't.
So on one hand, you have them discussing the life of Virginia Woolf, a towering figure of high literary culture, known for her tragic genius, her suicide.
The ultimate intellectual tragedy.
Right. And then on the other hand, they're discussing the simple, almost childlike memory of the clothing of a lady who had already left, riding a wooden horse.
And it's the convergence of those 2 topics, the highbrow, universal tragedy of Woolf,
right,
and this domestic, deeply personal tragedy of a vanished lady on a child's toy, that just instantly establishes this mood of profound dissonance, of dislocation.
It's like they're operating on 2 completely different planes of reality at the same time.
Exactly. It's this mix of rigorous intellectual discussion, deep-seated loneliness, and a very conscious attempt to evade the immediate, unbearable reality of post-war Seoul.
And the physical setting itself, the soljibe or bar, that has to be a central symbol.
Absolutely. It's the physical location where the speaker is trying to dissolve his solitude, but by framing the conversation with such heavy topics, the solitude is only.
Yeah.
It's just amplified.
You can't escape it.
You can't. And what's so fascinating here is how quickly the atmosphere shifts from just a simple bar scene to something more like a metaphysical landscape. You have to look closely at the specific imagery he uses, particularly those imported settings.
You mean the lines about Solvang?
Yes. Jana. A star falls in Solvang. And then, Onjano Jogo. hearing Solvang collapsing in the wind.
Okay, so the mention of Solvang is absolutely critical. This is obviously not a Korean place name. I mean, it usually refers to that Danish-style town in California, right? Or maybe just some generalized, romanticized Western place.
It could be either.
So why? Why import this idea of a foreign collapse into a poem about Korean post-war trauma? Why not just stick to the devastation that was right outside the door?
Because that is the absolute heart of the modernist aesthetic in post-war Korea. By juxtaposing this foreign, often romanticized image solving with the immediate local despair, the poet achieves two things that are crucial to the modernist movement.
Okay.
First, it instantly elevates the personal and national grief into a universal 20th century artistic problem. It's a way of saying, our tragedy is connected to the failures of the entire modern world, including the West.
So it's not just our problem.
Exactly. But second, and this is maybe more practical, it provides an aesthetic escape route. The local reality, the rubble, the poverty, the political instability of the 1950s, it was just too raw, too immediate. And maybe, to be frank, too ugly for the kind of sophisticated artistic expression he was aiming for.
So it's easier to talk about a beautiful ideal collapsing than the ugly reality.
Precisely. By imagining a clean, distant, beautiful ideal like Solvang collapsing in the wind, the poet can symbolize the collapse of all ideals, even the distant ones he longed for, without being trapped in just literal reportage of local misery.
So the collapse of Solvang in the wind symbolizes the idea that even the most beautiful, romantic, faraway ideals, the very things they dreamed about during the isolation of the war, they're just as susceptible to the ravages of time and reality as everything else they've lost. The world is just universally broken.
That's exactly right. And the wind, which in poetry so often signals the passage of time and inevitable separation, is the agent of that destruction. It ensures that not even the dream of Solvang can survive.
Wow. Okay, so if the setting establishes that mood, then the middle section of the poem is where the speaker really articulates this profound, inescapable sense of loss, this hiomo.
Yes, and our sources note that the poem manages to fuse several distinct forms of cultural despair into a single, overwhelming emotional cocktail.
It's not just one kind of sadness.
No, it's a multi-layered despair. You see echoes of the deep defeat and nihilism that permeated intellectual circles globally after World War II. You see the urban alienation you'd find in Western literature, from T.S. Eliot to Camus. And then underneath all of that is the raw, unique devastation and psychological scarring that was specific to 1950s Korean cities emerging from a civil war.
And that blending is what gives the poem its incredible density. It is. And this leads to that catastrophic articulation of lost beliefs. The speaker says, Hugo? When literature dies and life dies, and even the truth of love discards the shadow of affection. That's just total comprehensive nihilism. It's not a critique. It's a funeral announcement for all foundational values.
The magnitude of that statement, it cannot be overstated. When literature dies, the capacity for high thought, for inspiration, for aesthetic beauty, it's gone. When life dies, meaning itself is extinguished.
And that last part, when the truth of love discards even its shadow.
That means the possibility for any genuine connection or sacrifice or purity has vanished entirely. It means the core pillars of value art, existence, and relationships have been utterly liquidated.
And this, I think, is what makes that later mention of the person of love riding the wooden horse, where it says,
Dead.
Not visible, so utterly tragic. It confirms that existential emptiness. The love isn't just gone. Its very truth has abandoned its own ghost.
It is absolute abandonment, and it provides the motivation for the entire poem. If nothing remains, why continue? But this brings us to what might be the most provocative line in the entire work, the one that challenges the very nature of high tragic despair. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because the speaker suddenly undercuts all of this dramatic tragedy by pivoting to the unbearable commonness of life. He says, Hazajanja, Hazasanja, life is not lonely, merely as vulgar as the cover of a magazine. And that line is a sledgehammer to the romantic, isolated poet archetype. The poem is rejecting the idea of some dramatic, noble, tragic solitude. It's arguing that life isn't even worthy of such grand isolation. It's just painfully common, or tongsak.
Vulgar, cheap, superficial.
Disposable, like a glossy magazine cover. And this is a deeper, more agonizing realization than simple despair.
So if profound loneliness at least gives you the chance for some kind of high tragic art, then banality, this vulgarity, this tongsak, that's the ultimate insult to the modernist poet. So why fear life's commonness so much that the response is we are leaving? Why run away from something that's just vulgar?
Because the whole pursuit of ideals, represented by the lady, the wooden horse, and Woolf's art, was precisely an attempt to transcend that vulgarity. The existential emptiness, the heimo driving this sense of departure or etunam, isn't just the pain of loss. It's the recognition that the grand tragedy and the sublime ideals that were promised by culture and love have failed.
And all that's left is the cheap stuff.
All that remains is cheap, glossy superficiality that doesn't even grant you the dignity of genuine tragic suffering. If life holds no grandeur, only banality, the sophisticated soul feels compelled to withdraw. It's the ultimate disappointment of the modernist spirit in the face of that post-war reality.
So the trauma of the war didn't lead to some grand tragedy. It led to cheapness, which, for an intellectual, is far, far worse.
That's a profound way to put it. Tragedy at least acknowledges magnitude. Vulgarity denies it entirely.
Okay, now we have to dive into the core symbolic language here. This poem is exceptionally dense, and our analysis highlights 6 primary symbolic elements that really function as mechanisms to articulate this sense of absence and broken purity.
Right. Let's start with that central tragic triangle that structures the entire conversation. Woolf, the lady, and the horse. Starting with symbol 1, Virginia Woolf. She is so much more than just a literary reference here. The sources correctly label her the tragic symbol of existence and art. And we need to unpack what her specific tragedy lends to the speaker's unique localized despair.
Okay, but in 1950s Korea, intellectual circles were definitely aware of Western literature. But how immediate or intimate would a figure like Woolf have really felt? Why not reference a local figure of tragedy? Well, I think that intellectual distance is precisely the point. Woolf provides a sophisticated, a tragic, and crucially, a universal lens through which the speaker can view the trauma of soul. Her life embodies 4 essential, interconnected themes. You have genius, you have oppression, depression, or melancholy, and then the ultimate self-inflicted end, suicide. So she's the archetype.
She is the archetype of the hypersensitive artist, destroyed by a chaotic, insensitive modern world. By invoking her, the poet is basically saying, the destruction isn't just physical, like the rubble and soul, it is systemic and psychological, just like what happened to Woolf.
So the speaker is directly connecting its own inner sense of isolation and despair, his naemyeonwi-ol, to this global intellectual tragedy. Discussing Woolf allows him to elevate the uniquely Korean trauma into a universal artistic condition. It makes it both more palatable and, I guess, more profound.
It's a crucial mechanism, or jongki. It allows him to articulate this profound internal loss under the guise of an intellectual discussion. It avoids the danger of the poem devolving into just mere nationalistic lamentation. Woolf gives the grief a certain dignity and a universal scale. Okay, that makes sense. Moving on to symbol 2. The wooden horse. The Mokma. It's a child's toy, which instantly carries these associations of vulnerability and simplicity. Literarily, the wooden horse signifies childhood innocence, pure dreams, and unattainable fantasy. But we need to distinguish the Mokma, the stationary, often rocking child's toy, from, say, an active, powerful horse used in travel or war.
Right, it's not a real horse.
By choosing a wooden horse, the poet is emphasizing its immobility, its artificiality, and its connection to a lost past. It represents the pre-war ideal, the purity that was just utterly destroyed.
And the specific tragedy here is that the dream abandons the dreamer. The line is Sooknyeo, the wooden horse has abandoned its owner.
The abandonment is perhaps the cruelest detail in the whole poem. The ideal itself decided the reality was too harsh to stick around for, and what remains of this abandoned dream is only the sound of its bell, the banglesori.
The sound of the dream, not the dream itself, exactly. And the sound is described with just devastating detail. It is a limping or staggering over a shuso, an extinguished silver coin. Let's pause on that image for a second. What does a limping bell over an extinguished coin actually communicate? It's so specific.
It's one of the most powerful images of broken purity in all of Korean modernism. The simple, pure ideal, the horse and its bell, is now corrupted, it's injured, it's broken, it is limping.
And the coin.
The silver coin, the unjian, would traditionally symbolize value or purity or maybe the fare you need for the journey of life. And that silver coin is now extinguished kyojin. That means the dream has absolutely no currency, no value, no power in this harsh new reality. The limping sound is the residual pain of a broken dream, while the extinguished coin confirms the total economic and spiritual bankruptcy of the era.
That confirms the depth of the humo. The dream didn't just leave. It left behind this trail of ruined relics that still hurt.
Precisely. The horse is the past ideal, rendered completely useless and painful. And finally, symbol 3, the lady, the Sooknyeo. She's the mysterious figure who departed on that now broken horse. The lady is the ultimate abstract figure of absence, of buje. The text only refers to her by her clothing, her achjarak, and the fact that she left. She isn't a person. She is the personification of lost love, lost youthful dreams, and the generalized beauty or pure aspiration that the post-war era has violently stripped away.
So she exists purely in the memory of her departure.
That's it. And her role is to perfectly connect the abstract idea of love or beauty to the concrete image of the horse and its bell. The speaker is discussing the lady who left on the wooden horse, so he's inextricably linking the vanished ideal, the lady, to the broken dream, the horse.
She is the perfect ghost of what once gave life meaning before the collapse.
And crucially, we only talk about her clothing. Not her face, not her words, but the trailing edge of her presence. It suggests she was fleeting even when she was there.
Wow. Okay, so beyond that central triangle, the poem relies pretty heavily on the classic modernist toolbox to establish its context and mood.
Huh.
Indeed. Symbol 4, alcohol, night, and wind. These are not just atmospheric fluff, they are functional mechanisms of despair.
Right.
Night, or bam, is the shadow of existence. It's the time when self-deception fails and the darkness of the inner mind becomes visible. Wind, or baram, acts as this continuous destructive agent, representing the relentless passage of time and inevitable separation or farewell ibayol.
And the whole poem is framed by alcohol, Saul. It's the necessary temporary solution for loneliness. It's the chemical mechanism you need to even look reality in the face without immediately dissolving.
The depth of the despair necessitates the drink. It's what allows you to gain that faint consciousness we're going to discuss later. Okay, then we move to symbol 5, which is really the central emotional architecture of the entire work. The feeling of absence, the dolawoji and yunjio duel, things that will not return.
Exactly. The central emotional state is do, leaving in absence. All the key figures, the lady, the horse, wolf, they're all defined by their non-presence. There is a total tragic lack of any expectation that they will recover or return.
That's terrifying. It raises an important and terrifying question. What happens to hope when the primary objects of your desire, love, purity, inspiration, are defined only by their permanent absence? And the poem's answer is?
The poem answers that hope is replaced by a resigned necessity to confront the vacuum. The world is defined by permanent structural loss, and you have to either find radical new values or commit to living in the vacuum of the old ones. Which brings us to that last symbol, symbol 6, urban romantic nihilism. This feels like the unique flavor of 1950s Korean modernism that Park In-hwan so expertly captured. This concept really synthesizes everything we've talked about. Life in the post-war city on the surface might appear lively. The bars are open, people are drinking, magazines are being read, there's motion.
Oh, that's a facade.
It is. Beneath this surface, the poet diagnoses this deep, fundamental emptiness, or gonkyo. The city is a hollow shell where ideals have died, but the banality of existence, that tongsok, just keeps on going. The beauty of this poetry is that it doesn't just despair. It looks at the desolation and finds a tragic, sophisticated language for it.
It sounds like the ultimate sophisticated resignation. The poet is too refined to be crushed by mere loss, but he's fundamentally unable to find any meaning in the common world that's left over.
That sophisticated resignation, that's the signature scent of the intellectual post-war modernist.
All right, so now we can structure the comprehensive interpretation of all this.
Yeah.
Let's move from the historical rubble of soul to the poem's ultimate philosophical implications. Our sources identify 3 distinct, and I think essential, layers of understanding.
Right, 3 ways of looking at it. Let's start with layer 1. The post-war sentiment, the external trauma. Okay, we begin with the historical anchor. We have to remember the exact context. This poem emerged from 1950s Korea, a land of total physical and deep psychological ruin following the Korean War. And it wasn't just an external conflict, it was a civil war that fractured the national soul and destroyed all pre-existing social contracts and ideals.
So this layer interprets the poem as a symbolic portrait of an urban person's profound sense of emptiness. And it's directly caused by that war trauma. It's personalized national grief.
Exactly. And the symbols we just discussed map perfectly onto this external trauma. The bar is the refuge from the ruins. Virginia Woolf, a symbol of self-destruction, reflects the psychological breakdown of the entire era. The lady leaving represents the loss of hope for national unity or recovery.
And the wooden horse is the shattered ideals of pre-war innocence.
Perfect. And it's important to remember what was lost in the 1950s, not just life, but the political and social idealism of that immediate post-colonial era. The war destroyed the foundational capacity for trust, for love, for community.
Everything was broken.
Everything. So the core takeaway of Layer 1, according to the analysis, is the illustration of the lonely human in a time of no recovery. In Korean, amujotdo hopotoriji aneun sidawi around ingan. We have to dwell on that phrase, no recovery. That implies not just a current loneliness, but a structural, persistent, unending loneliness because the source of comfort, those ideals, is permanently broken.
Right. The poet is writing from a vacuum where healing is not even conceivable yet. And that level of desolation, it forces the poet to find a new language, a language that can handle the incoherence of reality, which I think leads us directly into the aesthetic layer. Yes, layer 2, modernist nihilism, or the aesthetic packaging. This layer shifts focus from the event itself, the war, to the artistic response, which was modernism. And Park In-hwan is a central figure in defining post-war Korean modernist poetry, which was a very deliberate break from earlier forms of lyricism. So what specific stylistic elements define Korean modernism in this era? How did they package their grief differently?
Well, they used techniques that were common to global modernism, things like fragmentation. The poem is a series of disjointed, evocative images rather than one coherent narrative. Alienation, the speaker is always an observer, detached from the scene. And cosmopolitan imagery, the use of foreign elements like Woolf and Solvang.
So this whole approach was a mechanism to handle a reality that was just. It was too chaotic for traditional stories or overly sentimental poetry.
Exactly. The poet is taking the unique, raw Korean grief and intentionally wrapping it in this universally recognizable modernist aesthetic. It elevates the national tragedy into a sophisticated, global conversation.
It becomes a structural condition of 20th century existence, not just a localized problem.
That's the key. The poet uses Woolf to frame his sorrow, and in doing so, he's essentially saying, my despair is not merely anecdotal, it is symptomatic of the global failure of civilization. And this intellectual distance, it provides both critical depth and a necessary protective barrier from the sheer emotional weight of the immediate trauma.
So it allows him to process the trauma not just as a victim of war, but as a participant in a global intellectual and spiritual crisis of nihilism?
Indeed. The focus shifts from what happened to how one exists when the values that define existence have perished. It's an internal aesthetic defense mechanism against an external total destruction.
Okay, so if the goal of modernism here is this kind of nihilism, the death of meaning, then why do we find the inclusion of that actively searching white horse in the final section? I mean, isn't that a betrayal of the nihilistic stance? And that brings us, I think, to the highest level of analysis.
That challenge is essential, and it reveals the poem's deepest philosophical core. Layer 3 is about life and existence, the philosophical reflection. It connects personal fate to universal tragedy. By focusing so deeply on Woolf's life, the poet universalizes his personal sorrow, linking it to the concept of yono yela, a Sooknyeo korum, a destined, fated loneliness.
So this loneliness isn't temporary. It's a permanent condition of modern existence.
Exactly.
And here we encounter the second equine image. We move from the broken stationary wooden horse to a white horse that is actively searching for the past. Yan Lenotos, like a white horse searching for youth, passing through two rock crevices.
This contrast is everything. The wooden horse, the Mokma, symbolizes the abandoned dream and a stagnant past. Its loss defined by its immobility. The white horse, the Baengma, however, suggests an active, ongoing quest for purity, for Cheongchun, or youth, and the lost past. This introduces a subtle, complex tension. It's a refusal to completely surrender to the Mokma's paralysis.
But this active quest is placed under severe duress. It's passing through two rock crevices. Those crevices symbolize profound difficulty, huge obstacles.
Precisely. The quest for purity, for a return to idealism or youth, is fraught, it's difficult, and it's perhaps impossible in this age of despair. The youth is sought, but the path requires extreme effort and the navigation of dangerous opposing forces, the two rocks.
So the poet is acknowledging the need for hope, even while he recognizes its agonizing improbability. It's an act of necessary defiance against total nihilism, a pragmatic, difficult hope. And this leads to the poem's ultimate paradoxical call to action. Despite the pervasive pessimism and the overwhelming sense of departure and absence, the speaker urges, we must open our eyes and drink a glass of wine. So we must drink to cope, but we have to open our eyes even while doing it. We can't let the wine dissolve our consciousness completely. And the line that follows is the philosophical climax of the entire poem. Goyu kojoyon, just holding on to the faint consciousness remaining in our hearts. So that's the key. This is the key philosophical pivot. If life is vulgar, Tong Sak, and if ideals are gone, Wolf, the lady, the Mokma, then the only remaining moral and existential obligation is to maintain a slight, almost desperate recognition of reality, a faint consciousness.
This is the poet's ultimate answer to the Hiwomo. It's not salvation, not at all, but maintenance. Just maintaining consciousness is the highest form of defiance against a world that demands nihilistic surrender. It is an intensely modernist concept. In a fragmented, ruined world, the self must not fragment. The act of holding on to the faint consciousness is the ultimate act of intellectual survival, not physical. It's a pragmatic resignation. We drink to survive the pain, but we stay aware. We stay present, even if the reality we recognize is only the persistent vacuum. So if we synthesize these three layers and all these polite symbols, what we really have is this magnificent condensation of history and philosophy into one short poem.
What's so fascinating here is how Park In-hwan manages to condense 6 critical, emotional, and conceptual layers into one brief, powerful work. It's truly a masterclass in compression and synthesis.
Okay, let's just recap these compressed layers one last time to make them really sticky for you.
First, we have the era of post-war solitude. That's the external trauma and the failure of national and personal recovery. Second, the loss of purity, exemplified by the broken, limping bell of the wooden horse.
Right.
Third, vanished love and lost beauty, represented by the lady, who is defined only by her absence. Then fourth, the artistic melancholy and the universal tragedy of the sensitive soul, embodied by Virginia Woolf, which links that personal trauma to a global intellectual failure. And fifth, that deep existential urban emptiness, the recognition that life isn't even tragic, it's just painfully vulgar, like a magazine cover. And finally, the sixth layer, the tragic dignity found in literature itself. Even when everything else dies, the act of articulating that death, of capturing the sorrowful sound of the wooden horse, becomes the only remaining form of meaning. The whole purpose of the poem is the maintenance of that faint consciousness. The sheer volume of intellectual and emotional material contained in this short, devastating poem it's just astounding.
It really is. So we started this deep dive with a glass of wine in a post-war bar, and we ended up traversing global modernism, Korean national grief, and the deepest questions of existence and survival. The profound beauty of this work lies in seeing how Park In-hwan didn't just lament the loss, but gave voice to a generation that felt utterly abandoned by all his former ideals, whether that was love, or literature, or simple hope.
The poem is deeply sorrowful, yes, but it achieves this kind of tragic dignity by using high art and sophisticated symbolism to frame a very common despair. It is a work of great power because it doesn't just ask us why we are sad. It asks us why we fear leaving, despite the cold, clinical realization that life is merely as vulgar as a magazine cover.
And this raises an important question for us today. Park In-hwan concludes with a kind of resigned hope for the future. That line, Kamondian for the future of the pessimism we hold. So if we are living in a new era of global disillusionment, where our own idealized ladies have vanished and our wooden horses have been broken by new forms of chaos, what form does our inevitable, necessary pessimism take today? The poet provides his final instruction. We must remember the sorrowful sound of the wooden horse, Churyinghan Mokma, Soryo Kyokayoya Handa. This sound is the lingering echo of broken dreams and lost innocence, the critical recognition of things that will not return. So the final thought for you to explore is this. What is the specific sorrowful sound of the wooden horse we are left to remember in our own era of technological and political disillusionment? And how does recognizing that sorrow become the first difficult step toward maintaining that essential faint consciousness? A challenging and worthy question to take with you as you navigate the noise of today. Thank you for diving deep with us.